Okay,
Yeah.
so Rob, back with Brad. We manage the infrastructure around the PCI commitments. We were mandated to, our high environment to the cloud, to support the business, prove out this infrastructure. We very classic environment: Windows physical, NT domain, full network stack, physical HSMs. We clearly wanted to end with, Azure in Azure, confidential compute, attestation, managed HSMs, no physical infrastructure. The constraints. It's very brownfield. We had to the messy interim states that we were going to land in. We had to support multiple we had to support integrations back into the on-prem environment, the existing services. We were going to go into the cloud with a whimper, not a bang. It wasn't going to be everything at once. We had to stay compliant the entire time. So, currently PCI 3.2, we were going to, target 4.0 as we moved, but every state that we transitioned through still had to stay compliant. Goals, we really wanted it 3P, build it like our customers, be able to prove out the infrastructure, show that this works. And then management just said pick 3 from fast, secure, and cheap, and we tried to. Okay. So the thing that we landed on is based on the Azure landing zone. It's sort of the cloud adoption. So that includes just some components that I'll talk through in detail. For identity, it's Entra tenant, cloud only. Connectivity, we were going to do like all private in the cloud, and then on-prem integration via VP existing private network. From perspective of the infrastructure, we were going to use Azure policy to enforce integration controls for the PCI DSS, as well as for all of just the high security controls that we were interested in. From a deployment perspective, targeting Azure DevOps, CI/CD pipelines, a whole stack for doing that. Okay, so digging in a little bit on the identity side, we had there are existing tenants within Microsoft, both for the corporate side or the production side. It was important for us to be able to have like a ring fence compliance boundary, that we understood where all the admins were, what processes they followed. We'd be able to demonstrate that during, the PCI audit, and so we ended up provisioning a brand new dedicated tenant. And it turned out to be a really important decision for us, because there's a lot of places where tenant admins either have visibility of like auditing, and they have the ability to unwind controls. And so, starting with that, giving us a small tenant that did not have hundreds or thousands of services like the other production tenants, was an important decision. It allowed us to go in and layer, just appropriate controls there, enforcing JIT 100% of the time, that that all access that was privileged was time bound with JIT, using conditional access to constrain how all the identities in the tenant were used. This gives us the ability to say, from what networks are you allowed to authenticate, for which identities, which is, those granular controls only exist at level. And again, without being a tenant admin, you can't control these things appropriately. And and doing it with another part of the organization was a non-starter for us. We got to control all of the authentication controls and all of the auditing and monitoring too. So. Okay, so with that as the basis, we build on top of that, our Azure DevOps, so a SaaS offering, but as with backed by the identity of the tenant. And so, layering in for Azure DevOps, all of the similar admin controls, everything is through JIT. It's all time bound. It does use the same standardized auditing and monitoring that pumps the log analytics, that gives us the oversight of the configuration of DevOps, the ability to understand who is doing what when, and rolling and adjusting any of the controls that are implemented in the policy. With those controls, we layer branch, check-in, release policies, approval gates, everything that we need to to both meet PCI and to ensure that we have correct oversight for all changes that propagate through that part of the system. For the infrastructure that Azure DevOps uses, we had a couple different components there. So the compute for all of the actions that are taken, all the builds, all of the access to signing keys or privileged identities, we're building dedicated compute that sits within the tenant boundary, that sits within the networks, that's under all of these controls that I've been talking about. That gives and on those machines, we tightly control all of the everything that lands on them. All binaries are checked in. There's no outbound egress of just-in-time loading, and so we get a nice strong foundation for the environment that we're running the CD pipelines in. We were able to do a couple improvements on those identities, eliminate all credentials. ADO supports a federated identity model into Entra that allows us to have a credentialless identity there, and we can enforce the least privilege. There's a great feature called delegate role assignments with conditions that allows us to not have deployment identities that just have a full set of privileges. They have very targeted privileges that allow them to assign just the permissions that they need, and that gives us a nice least privilege model for doing that work. Okay, on top of that, the identity and access management, all of that is configured in source in ADO. We deploy that configuration back into the tenant, and it both enforces those configurations and produces audits around those configurations. And we both approve and validate all of those source as part of check-in gates, and then deploy that into the infrastructure. Network-wise, lots of firewalls, ingress egress from DDoS, standard on-prem integration, vWAN, Azure DNS. And this gives us the ability to both safely run environment and integrate with the existing services that are back on-prem, and give us the for all of the messy states that we have to live in, a foundation where we can still have controls that meet the PCI DSS, that are demonstratable, that check all those boxes, as well as improve the security. And all of that's deployed again through ADO, same infrastructure in that case with Terraform. What the feature teams get here is a landing zone where they have the ability to do their own deployments. They have the ability to use the types of keys that they need to either sign or runtime access to keys that they need for both authentication, authorization, and transport, and encryption and access eventually to the MHSMs. But all on a private network, all in a ring-fence boundary that gives them, a place to operate. It's safe. They can do what they need to do. They're prevented via policy from doing the things that that would violate any of those. And then they, as they land that infrastructure, it participates in the environment. It produces all of the auditing without any work on their side. It gives them a lot of flexibility without having to handhold each of the types of changes and that they might consider making. Okay, and so from an application layer, so we built all that, and then we start deploying kind of the infrastructure for the application in there. And the two key components here that are worth talking about, manage HSM. As Brad said, we implemented a bring your own key. So we both have requirements to escrow keys that we're using, and so we need to be able to have them outside of the cloud and then bring them in. And so, there's a well-established process for that. And that's also part of, ultimately, like our build out strategy as we go to additional regions. We need to bring those keys into, brand new regions, brand new MHSMs, and have them participate in the infrastructure the same. And again, implemented only just-in-time access for all of this, PIN for groups. There's slightly different ways of implementing JIT in each of these cases, but we were able to get to that same spot of it's only access that is two-person approved. It's time bound. Of course, AKS, confidential containers, Entra integration throughout all of this. And so, we're not relying on local credentials. We're eliminating them so that we have one story about how people get access, that it's enforced via JIT, um, and a really consistent story around that throughout all of the different pieces of infrastructure. Implemented container logging, again, standardized logging back into Azure monitoring, log analytics, and with container identities themselves being produced from Entra, so we have a consistent story for PaaS access within the environment that's necessary, either for just operational or features. And then again, signing identities or in environment identities that with access only via those private networks. And so we again, just everything is within the boundary, and there are definitely segmentation within that for different concerns, but the ability to demonstrate at any point for either audit or for our own security, who, what, where is allowed. Okay, quick lessons learned, to summarize in here, we really focused on executing the security basics, get everything into the platform identities, like don't all these local credentials, don't have keys, or like storage keys, things that allow you to unobservedly operate the infrastructure. Double down on network isolation. Like Azure by default deploys everything into public, and you have to work to constrain that, but pulling everything inside gives us a good story for PCI and confidence that like this, we have a layered approach that protects these interfaces regardless of where what happens with identity. Implement least privilege, always JIT. We were able to focus on that, get to the spot where we were confident that covered everything in the environment, uh, and then implementing universal audit. The observability of all of this, the observability of what's happening in the cloud, is kind of awesome. You can get very granular data around what's happening at the control plane and the data plane, and really use that data from a security perspective to prove what is and isn't happening, and with which identities, and really make sure that you're burning down any of the cases where you either misconfigured something or there was, ultimately, if in the case of a breach, you'd have data. Really quick, last couple stops. The These investments in training are expensive. It's hard to do all of this. It moves really quickly. There's the last bullet there. It's evolving really fast. Most of what I just talked about 2 years ago didn't exist, and so we're adopting, or we're investigating these features, adopting them, prototyping and rolling them out, and we have to do it really quick. And it changes the nature of security throughout the platform constantly. And you have to take strategies to keep your problem space small, and focus so that you can do a good job on those pieces. And then if you ever get there to the steady state, it's really cheap, but it's hard to get steady. Okay, that's it.